Welcome to the Business of Us podcast, where we explore the intersection of business, relationships, and family life. This season, we're focusing on the concept of the three big mountains of partnership, purpose, and passion, which are the three big challenges that all couples will face throughout their relationships. And whether you're scaling your first mountain or learning to navigate life after the summit, these episodes will give you stories, strategies, and inspiration for the journey. Today, it's my great pleasure to introduce my guest, Jamie Bourne, who's also my co-host. Jamie is a licensed therapist who works globally with EO and YPO members, entrepreneurs, and their families to help them navigate the unique pressures that come with a high-performance business and high-stakes relationships. Jamie is a sought-after speaker, retreat leader, and facilitator of workshops, and she's deeply passionate about helping entrepreneurs and their families to navigate the intersection of mental, relational, and family wellness. The fun disclosure: it's not fun, but it's very important. Please keep in mind our podcast is for information only and is not for therapy. If you need professional support, please recommend psychologytoday.com for a whole host of resources and local therapists. Today's big question: how can we define ourselves in a way that leads to a life of purpose and meaning as work, kids, and other primary sources of identity exit center stage? So Jamie, thanks for joining me today. Nice to see you.
Thanks for having me on, Cameron. Super excited to dive into this. This is a topic that has been front and center for me recently. So excited to dig in.
I love it. Me too. I just had a discussion last night with someone about the value of being able to zoom way out and look at our relationships from the standpoint of decades. Both because in general, as human beings, when we can get some distance and zoom out, we tend to make wiser decisions. But also because sometimes there's some big things coming. Can you tell us a little bit about why this moment of work and kids becoming less important has such a big impact on a couple?
I mean, it has a huge impact on people individually and in the couple system, right? So it impacts all facets. I think it sometimes sneaks up on people. Like, theoretically that it's coming in the background. And even as the years sort of tick by, all of a sudden it's sort of there. And so you've got decades where work and kids in some cases quietly organize everything. And as those two things either, separately or simultaneously start to loosen their grip, I think this big question presents itself of like, who are we now and who are we to each other without all of those roles, right? So you've got the individual grappling with that specific question, and then the couple system also grappling with that question. So it becomes really complex in some cases. And I think that those kinds of questions can really deepen intimacy or alternatively expose distance that's been easy to ignore when you have all of the hustle and bustle of work and kids.
And I'm curious, how can couples who are on mountain one or two, where they're either in the just like, how do we make this work, dealing with careers and young kids and aging parents, whatever it is, where it just feels overwhelming, or they're on mountain two, where they've, achieved a degree of stability, but now they're starting to think maybe they're ready for a next chapter or a big change in their lives. They've got a lot going on. How can they think about mountain three in a way that isn't overwhelming and is useful to their relationships?
Yeah, I think mountain 3, it doesn't wait until you're ready, right? And so I think a lot of the patterns that we start building in mountain 1 or 2, right? Things how we communicate with one another, how we make meaning, how we handle change, how we handle transitions, how intentional we are at looking future forward, right? Those are the practices that we then bring with us into mountain 3. And so I think it's easy to sort of put that in the future of like, oh, we'll think about that at a later time, right? So I think it's sort of right sizing it where it doesn't become the sole focus, but it is something that you're dipping your toes in from time to time and saying, are we aligned with this sort of future vision, and are the practices that we're currently engaging in, do they support that or not? And that's how you then start to, I think, make modifications, because sometimes the answer is no, right? The things that we're doing today are not aligned with that kind of long term vision that we have for ourselves as we think about entering mountain 3, and then you can course correct in real time. So it's this sort of balance between focusing in on the mountain that you're in, but not losing sight of the summit of mountain 3.
hmm So say a little more about you've got your own lived experience, but you work with tons of couples. What do you see in the couples who handle this well and the ones who don't? Because I think this is sort of interesting is like probably the wrong word to put on this, but I guess thought provoking, this idea that there's these two main waves of divorces or separations. There's the kind of the couples who never really get beyond the high conflict. How do we make it work? But then there's this second group, and I've heard them called, like, I think one word I heard was like silver separations, or the two waves of divorces, where these relationships have just lost their spark and they kind of just die with a whimper, not with a bang. And it is often after the thing that the glue that kept the couple together, whether that was making your way in the world financially or raising kids or whatever, has stepped off center stage.
Yeah, so I think there are some differences in terms of successful couples who navigate this transition successfully versus those who struggle with it. I think one primary driver is for couples that I see that navigate this transition really well. It doesn't mean perfectly, right, or without elevated emotions, those sorts of things, but who navigate through this. There tends to be this real focus that the system, the couple system, is primary and everything else sort of falls into that, where it isn't and it's the intentionality behind that, right? So it's the couples that are making time to connect with one another and then to talk about the family unit if that applies, or the business if that applies. And I think that these couples also tend to be people who stay very curious and tend to talk about things really, really early. So they're intentional about looking forward and also intentional about communicating before things start to take on a mind of their own and really spiral. So there's some systems in place typically that work for them, and they're flexible though also in modifying those systems when they need to. And I think some of the couples who tend to struggle with these transitions are the folks that sort of, there's this assumption that things are just going to work itself out, or we're going to avoid this conversation because there's something pressing in real time that I need to navigate. And then that avoidance builds in the background, right? And so I think sometimes people realize too late that they've grown in parallel, right? That's like the silos, right? Instead of growing together.
I like that. Okay. Growing in silos instead of in parallel. So I'll just say it. I'm kind of fascinated by divorce. Also, like, I'm fascinated with death. And most people, or many people, find these like depressing
Yeah.
and morbid. So let's like reframe this. What are some couples who have good stories around this change? Ones who really built something on the foundation of what they had already built, and maybe built something even way better and exciting as they moved into that third mountain.
So, you may have to ask that again, but I wanna throw a comment in here as you said that, right? So there's actually a practice called the, Maranasati. Are you familiar with this?
I don't think so.
This is a, Buddhist practice where they have people, meditate on their death, which in Western culture is very taboo, right? People get very uncomfortable talking about that. And yet, the premise is that the more that you recognize that that is inevitable, the more present you can be in real time and grateful for the things that you have, and to maintain a level of perspective around our problems, so to speak. And I think that divorce could potentially be looked at in a similar framework.
I love that. I didn't know that term, but yes, I do. This is also, I think a lot of people talk about. I do a death meditation every night as I go to bed. It is not meant to be depressing, as you said. It's just sort of a reminder of all the things in life which I'm so passionate about, and I'm so attached to a certain outcome. There's a degree of perspective. But I had never thought of a divorce meditation. That'd be a whole nother thing.
This is not a fully fleshed out idea, obviously, right? But like thinking about it, because if you think about it, it's kind of keeping it right sized and recognizing that these are possibilities. Statistics say, right, that it is prevalent. And so by looking at that, I think you do somehow become better equipped to navigate through some of those things, right? Like if we were to get divorced, what do we think would be the precipitating factors around that, right? And really looking at things differently. I don't know.
Yeah, there's a fascinating, we could really go off on a tangent here. I think how I think about it is I just had a dentist appointment this morning and it was great. No, it was not. Does anyone like going to the dentist? I don't.
Had I?
But we were talking about my teeth, which, knock on wood, thank goodness they said are really healthy. But I'm gonna have a small procedure. And they said, well, why do you want to do it? It's It's basically like a little pothole in one of my teeth, they said. So it's not like a cavity or anything. But I was like, like I figure I'm gonna, live for a little bit longer. And so I should just like a pothole, I should get it fixed. When they were like, oh no, you're gonna live for a long time, you're still young. And I think that's maybe a bit of the tension where I feel like some people talk about perhaps death or divorce in kind of a defeatist, fatalistic way, or sometimes almost like a threat, which is different than, all I meant to say to the dentist, who I'm sure didn't want to go this deep at 7:15 a.m. on a Thursday, but was just that my death is inevitable. I know it will come, and whether it comes, sooner or later, it's something that I am, relatively at peace with. But anyway, this is such a fun tangent, but let's go back to.
Well, but you can go back. No, we're going to go back there, but really, I like think about what you just said, right? Because it's keeping things right size, but it's also addressing things proactively and not allowing something to get bigger than it needs to be, right? Which is on point with everything that we're saying around navigating mountains.
All right. I like it. Death, divorce, and meditation. We've got an episode title already. So, Jamie, are there any couples that you know who have good stories around this sort of change that you can share with everyone?
I think that there's this space around reinventing purpose together. Purpose seems to be the thing that it's the thread that kind of comes back to, because I think when we experience these big transitions, there's often psychological challenges, changes that occur. There's relational challenges and changes that occur. And then there's the kind of existential changes that occur around, like, who am I now? Who are we now? What does this really look like? And so I think, again, approaching that not in the defeatist sort of way, but with a level of excitement. I mean, the reality is that you have an opportunity to kind of reinvent your life, and you can make that look however you want. And so sometimes I think that looks like, travel, mentorship, shared project. And I think the common thread isn't what people choose, but it's that they choose it together. And I think the other thing that comes up for me around this is really around this concept of interdependency, that each individual also needs to have their own thing that drives them, sustains them, and then the shared mutual interests around that interdependent connection.
Sort of deepening the individual and the collective.
Mhm.
I mean, obviously, this is a big part of our topic on the podcast. How does this look different when there's a business exit of some kind? Because it just seems to me like that's very different than a corporate job.
There's some parallels, and I think that it is different. I, just mentioned, right, we've got sort of the psychological, the relational, and the existential shifts. And so the existential shifts that I'm talking about are these sort of deep internal sense that life lacks inherent meaning, purpose, or significance sometimes, right? And interestingly, parallel here, right, is that sometimes these things actually make us confront our own mortality and do lead to feelings of dread, emptiness, anxiety, despair, right? All of those things. And I think corporate retirement in some way, or even just retirement in general, I think is a little bit more socially normalized and tends to generally occur at a different age, right? When you're talking about business exits, those happen in different, not always, but at times in different developmental paths in life. And so I think that the common thread is that there can still be this sort of identity loss that occurs. But I think that retirement and corporate retirement tend to be more socially normalized, and business exits tend to hit all of those facets a little faster with a little bit more intensity.
I'm also curious about that transition. I'm going to put this word in quotes, but here I'll use air quotes. Failure, because it also seems like, when I think of people I've seen, friends, people of my parents' generation, some people kind of go out on a high, kind of the proverbial mic drop, but it seems like more often than not, there's a little bit of a deflating kind of letdown, feeling like you hung on just a little bit too long to make retirement age. Or I'm thinking of friends I've got who had very successful business careers, but ultimately the last exit was not, maybe it was it wasn't an exit at all, or it was the least successful of them. So I'm curious how that impacts that transition as well, whether people kind of really feel like they did it on their own terms and they had the mic drop and everyone applauded and they walked off stage, or they were kind of, ushered off stage, so to speak.
I think that it can amplify things, but I think one of the things that surprises people is that even in exits that are well thought out and well planned, that some of those feelings that you're describing emerge anyway,
Mm.
right? It kind of makes me think about what you had said. I don't even remember how long ago this was now, but I think you shared at some point that, you made the decision to sell your company to the employees. And at some point you were like, wait, what?
Oh yeah.
What's happening? They're all trying to take the company from me.
I was like, oh wait, it was my idea. But yeah, I had all sorts of weird feelings.
Right. So I think even under really good circumstances, the transitions are very, very layered and complex. And so I think that the same sentiments come out, but I think that they're amplified in certain scenarios. And then if you've got, an exit that was either unplanned or you're exiting for survival's sake, the business is not sustainable, right? That then certainly is going to amplify probably all areas, not just the psychological and relational, definitely the existential, because right, this is a big piece to what I've been personally diving deep into content wise is just the over identification with your internal value with the value of your business and then how do you talk to yourself about that. And so I think the impact of that is really profound, even though most of the time it doesn't say anything about the person. It says something about, the viability of the business or external factors going on, and that people still have inherent value, whether their business is successful or has a challenging Q4.
But that changes, of course, yeah, as you said, based on how much we identify with the business. And
Yeah,
it's pretty hard not to, at least in my experience, it's pretty hard not to fuse to some degree with my business and the results it's achieving or not.
100%. And think about when we meet people, what is the question that you get? What do you do? Tell me what you do. It's not uncommon in our society to identify by our achievements and outcomes. And I think that's really, really amplified more so in entrepreneurship. And so, my challenge that I'm offering people that I work with is to really expand your definition of what it means to be successful. That it isn't just about these outcomes that we're generating, which are important and meaningful and wonderful. It's also about the sustainability of our mental health and our relational wellness. And so, how are you tracking those things for yourself? What is your identity outside of this one piece? There's got to be other components of things that drive us and give us passion outside of the business entity.
I'm curious. So I saw a talk, gosh, it was a couple years ago. It was kind of a TEDx style talk. And this woman was talking about how it's kind of a down, she was an entrepreneur, down moment in her life. And how her personality was, most people are like, ooh, there's a cliff. Let's let's lean back a little bit. And her personality was, how fast can I run and how far can I jump off the cliff to go dive into the water below? Hopefully there's water below. I've always thought of this in myself personally. I know it's not how everyone feels. I just love the idea of jumping into the deep end. Like if I see a pool, like just, like as like a metaphor, I'm like, just I want to go into the deep end and just thrash all around because I'll get to where I want to go so much faster. The idea of wading in is really boring to me. So I'm curious on that, when we think about these big life transitions, is it better to just like jump into the deep end or jump off the cliff and be like, I'm going to change my career at the exact moment we become empty nesters, at the exact moment that, whatever else changes that is a big source of meaning? Or is it better to kind of try to stagger these big transitions over time for both the individual well-being and the couple's well-being?
I think there's pros and cons to both. Like everything, there's side effects. I do think in general, staggering helps if you can, mostly because it's fewer earthquakes to navigate at the exact same time. But I think that what's more important than the timing is the kind of strategies around navigating it, how we're talking about it, how we're planning, how we're supporting one another through the change. And so there's a space where doing everything all at once, you have empty blank canvas to build from. Right? Alternatively, if you're staggering, I think that also can, in some ways, make the transition longer. Right, than just sort of pulling the Band-Aid off and doing it all at once. So I can see a scenario where, one would work better for one person and another would work better for another person.
It seems like there's almost like a a critical like skill or competency in the language of business here. And I think this is probably a bit of what the Three Mountains model is on the largest scale trying to make clear of this ability to navigate big changes in the structure or the system that the couple and the family have set up. So you've talked a lot, I'm just trying to think, you've talked a lot about, the earlier you can talk about it, the better, staying curious. Like what, I'm just trying to think of like you were working with a couple and they were right on the cusp of one of these big transitions. Let's just say, I feel like sort of the archetypal one would be kids moving out and professional career, moving into some kind of semi-retired or fully retired mode. Like what would be your like three pieces of advice you would give them, not knowing much about their demographic or anything else?
So I think the three pieces of advice would be connection, alignment, and then communicate. I think a lot of times people jump into the communication piece because they're, where it's like, oh, we're going to have this meeting sort of once a week to touch base and check in on where we're at. And it's easy, I think, to kind of skip over the connection and alignment piece. And so I think a real easy way to gauge those things, and this is a great practice to be utilizing throughout, but just asking on a scale of 1 to 10, how connected do you feel to me this week or this month,
Mm.
right? And you can alternate the frequency of that depending on the season that you're in and where you're at, what transitions were going on. And if I'm rating this at, like an 8 and my partner is rating this at a 4, that's indicative that we're out of alignment in some places as well, right? Because I'm assessing it in one way, you're assessing it in a different way. And so why is that? If those numbers are similar, you can go a little deeper. Great. Tell me why you feel that connected to me. What is it that's going on that allows us to be in that space together for each person? And then there's kind of the negotiating of the alignment spaces and then moving into the communication and tactical pieces around strategizing. But generally, I think people jump too quickly into the strategizing before
Mhm.
they really make sure that the connection and alignment pieces are solid.
That makes sense. I mean, I think if you can, the things that really get us from point A to point B, I suppose at the deepest level are things like shared values and beliefs and purpose and staying connected along the way with whatever life brings, because it always seems to bring something unexpected. All right, I like that. So I'm curious, Jamie, how do you think about this future transition in your own relationship?
I feel like the profession that I'm in is such a double-edged sword. It's almost like the amount of awareness sometimes that you have around these things, right? It's like as a therapist, sometimes I'm like, oh, is this the moment that's gonna like stick with my kid forever? And nobody is immune from humanity, right? Kids always walk away from their parents with something that they're grappling with, even the best intended. And I think that this is similar to that, right? Where it's like acutely aware that our oldest is now 10. And so she's over halfway. And I'm like, how did that, they say it goes by in a blink of an eye. And it really, really does. And so one thing that I try to do is to really balance that sort of right awareness of how much to think about the future transition versus focusing on what's going on present day. And really trying to look at that as not an ending at all, like as the kids transition out and things may slow down, that's actually, the beginning of a different phase. Being really honest about the things that we're afraid of, trying to be proactive rather than reactive, which is hard to do in the phase of life that we're in. So we're not perfect at it, and keeping in mind, right? That's why it's like the couple as the primary, right? Because one day it's just going to be Seth and I, right? And that is the space that we're really, really occupying, and all of these other things are really. He would said to me as we were walking out of the house this morning to take the kids to school. He said, I was just thinking, it just dawned on me, how cool are all the memories that we've made with one another and with our family, and taking those moments, right? And I'm the crazy person in the morning that's like, come on, we gotta go. We're like, get in the car. And he kind of strolls out with his cup of coffee and he's like, it's just really cool the things that we've done. And so being able to have that sort of balance between like present day, we've got to get things done and do the things, and also like a lot of gratitude around what we've done and excitement for what the future holds. I always appreciate his perspective. I'm very confident that we would have much less fun. There would be much less laughter in our house if Seth was not there. He just brings this lovely ability to like slow down and really ground and be very, very grateful for all the,
Sounds like a great compliment.
yeah.
Yeah, I always think that it's funny how, on the one hand, it's great to be intentional and know all this stuff, but sometimes it's just great to play together and be goofy and stop thinking about stuff, stop being intentional. I love that. All right, well, let's do our final take. Jamie, I'm curious, is there anything you didn't get to or anything you'd really like to reiterate to our audience about this enormous and very important topic?
I think the only thing that I would say is that I've been really looking at these considerations around how we look at and navigate business can actually really apply to who we are as people and as a couple system, right? It's like you're looking at doing business valuations, and why aren't we doing that for our own mental health and relational health? That we can apply those same kind of principles there. So I think that's it's just a thought that's been really present with me that there's a lot of ways that we approach business that actually really, really apply elsewhere.
I think it's, I think of a lot of businesses about making the invisible visible. We have financial metrics, but it's also, I know for me in my career, it was, and I think this is core to most well-run businesses, but it's like, how do we really measure culture? Or how do we really measure client satisfaction? And it sounds like what you're saying is it's a bit of that same question for how do we really measure our emotional bank account with our partner or with our kids or our mental well-being or something like that. Is that right?
Yeah, 100%.
It's like next level biohacking. I love it. All right. Well, Jamie, thank you so much for sharing all your wisdom and perspective on this.
Yeah.
And I guess let's see. I'll wrap us up. So the Business of Us is brought to you by myself, Cameron Medill, and Jamie Bourne. Music is from our friends at Marmoset, and our theme song is Kenton by Dr. Crosby. We always love hearing from you all out there what you'd like to listen to next. Please drop us a line at businessofuspodcast@gmail.com and share whatever is on your mind. Until the next time, we wish you the best of luck in making your relationship intentional and remarkable.